Hi, I'm Brandon Poe, founder of Poe Group Advisors and creator of the Accounting Practice Academy. You are listening to the Accountant's Flight Plan podcast, where we talk about stuff in the accounting world. If you're looking to buy or sell a practice, we are the premier accounting practice intermediary firm in the industry. Check us out at PoeGroupAdvisors.com. If you're a firm owner looking to build a more profitable practice while actually reducing owner hours, sign up for our practice management workshop, which only runs a few times per year. Learn more at accountingpracticeacademy.com. Welcome to the Accounting Flight Plan podcast. Today I have a return guest, David Spray, who is a former CPA. He's the founder and president of Export Advisors, Inc., which is a consulting firm that specializes in the IC Disc tax savings program. Dave's a good friend of mine. We're in Strategic Coach together. So I'm very excited about this conversation. So Dave founded Export Advisors in 2009. And since then, they've helped hundreds of companies achieve more than $200 million in tax savings. Before he founded Export Advisors, he served as CFO for a privately held company in Houston, and later served as director of business development for a Houston-based CPA firm. He's got substantial experience as a podcast host. He launched his first podcast, the IC Discs Show, in 2019, and his second podcast, Podcasting Stories, in 2021. Dave has a bachelor's in accounting from the University of Texas at Austin and an MBA from the University of Houston. And on his way to Colorado, because he's got a home in Colorado. And so
that is true.
Fortunate people, I guess, to summer somewhere else. That's posh of you, Dave. Welcome back to our show. Thanks for being
here. You're welcome. A point of clarification. I think this is my first time on your show, but you were a guest on my podcast about a year ago.
Oh, no, I thought I had you on. I thought you were on. I have to look back in our records.
Maybe I'm confused.
At any rate, a lot of people, I don't think, know what an IC disc is. Before I met you, I didn't know what an IC disc was. So can you briefly tell us what that is?
Yeah. So it stands for Interest Charge Domestic International Sales Corporation. Quite a mouthful, hence the acronym IC disc. In its simplest form, it's a way, it's a tax incentive to encourage exporting of U.S. products. And it is really designed for privately held, closely held companies. That's who most benefits from it. And what it lets a company do is segregate their income between domestic and export. And the export piece is taxed at a lower tax rate, which is the dividends, capital gains tax rate. So it's the spread between those two tax rates that creates the tax savings.
Yeah. And, you were focused on this exclusively for a long time. So I guess that is one of those niche specialties that, it's been good for you, but I guess you probably learned so much. Your depth of knowledge in IC discs is probably kind of off the charts, I would think.
Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, I've got the technical team that really is more technically proficient. So compared to them, I don't feel like I'm an expert, but I'm probably in the top 100 in the US, I suppose, as far as IC disc knowledge.
Yeah. I talked to you, I guess, 3 months ago or so, and you were very, very excited about, your podcasting that you got going on now. So back to the IC Discs Show, which is your podcast. What prompted you to start podcasting?
Yeah, really, it was just a way to share information and education with folks. The subject can be a little bit dry, so I thought it might be a little easier if people could listen to it while they're driving to work or working out or whatever. And it was also a way to just have some different types of experts on the show, IC disc attorneys and other types, to Again, just to help be a resource. And then over time, it really has kind of morphed a little bit into really a great way to showcase clients of ours and key strategic partners. You being one of them. Like I mentioned, you were on the show, I think about a year ago.
Yeah, I have been podcasting for some time, and I like the channel. It's I don't know, it kind of lends itself to a conversational, um, casual sort of atmosphere. Maybe that's
Yeah,
the word, but
I agree. Yeah.
And people like listening to them because they feel more connected to the subject matter, and I guess to the people that are putting it on. So you're right, and your audience and my audience, there's definitely overlap. So of the episodes that you've recorded, like what are some of the ones that the CPA audience would find most interesting?
Yeah, so there's actually 5 of them that I thought they'd find interesting. I jotted this down. So episode 3 with John Flatowitz, the former managing partner of the largest independent firm in Houston, about a 300-person firm called Briggs and Veselka. And then about a year later, I brought on the current managing partner, Sheila Enriquez. And then right after that, I had John Warlow on, who I believe has also been on your show.
No,
Actually, Ron Baker. I'm sorry, it was Ron Baker.
Yeah, Ron Baker's been on our podcast.
Yeah, so we had, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to sidetrack, but so John Warlow, author of Built to Sell, and he has one of the top business podcasts, Built to Sell Radio. Randy Reimer, the founder of a 25-person Houston CPA firm. And then the crown jewel of my guest list, Ron Baker, the famous Ron Baker, who many of your listeners will know. And I had him on. I was really excited to have him on because I met him about 15 years ago. I flew to Las Vegas because he was speaking at a conference, and I flew there just to have a drink with him. And then I left and came back home. But he literally is, and I told him on the podcast that he has literally made me millions of dollars because of his work and his philosophies.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the 5 that I think that people have found the most interesting. And the website is icdiscshow.com, ic-discshow.com.
Yeah, Ron's a really big influencer in the profession. We actually feature some of his concepts in Accounting Practice Academy because we have a module just on pricing, and
okay.
Yeah, it's very aligned with Ron's work, very shaped by Ron's work.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he's trailblazer.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I noticed with this new launch of your latest business, which is it called Your Podcast.Team?
That's it. Yep.
That's it. Because you and I, we've known each other for a long time, and
Yeah.
over the years, we've shared different ideas about what we want to do with our business or what we want to start. And,
Mm-hmm.
We've become good friends, and we share that stuff. And one thing I noticed was your energy level when you were talking about this new venture, your energy level, and just, you could tell a difference, a spike. And so I could tell that you're excited about it. What got that going? Like what, because you had explored a couple of different ways to take things, and I was sort of surprised that you had taken to this podcasting idea, and I'd love to hear about kind of what prompted you to start it.
Well, it was interesting because when I do a podcast, I always have a debrief with the guest afterwards. And I think we're at about 24 episodes now. We do about one a month. And in the debrief, I think 22 of the 24 guests told me how much they wish they had a podcast. They were very complimentary. I mean, none of the 24 had, and 22 of them said they wish they had one. So I always encouraged them to start one. I said, hey, call me. I'm happy to share what I've learned. But none of them actually launched a podcast. And I suspected the reason was, I mean, starting a podcast can be daunting. It's the rarest form of online content. There's 50 billion YouTube videos and only 1.7 million podcasts. And of those 1.7 million, only 377,000 of them have published in the last 90 days and have more than 10 episodes. So it's the rarest form of online content. And I think these people are just a little overwhelmed by the technological challenges and, am I a good enough interviewer? What am I going to talk about? So I had this supposition, and Dan Sullivan, who we both know, the founder of Strategic Coach, he has a theory that when you have a new business idea, don't talk to your friends, don't talk to your family, test it on what he calls check writers. So I emailed 3 of my former guests and said, hey, if you want, we can help you, launch your own podcast. Are you interested? And 2 of the 3 immediately said yes, and 1 said maybe. And then, so they're like, how much? I spent about 5 minutes figuring out, what I think we should charge. I gave them a price. They said great. And in an hour's time, I went from a hypothesis to having a new business. And which is ironic because the Colby, I'm actually relatively low on quick start. But I think because I've been around entrepreneurs for so long and in Strategic Coach, I think whatever quick start I do have, I've managed to refine and amplify.
Yeah. Yeah. And for you people that aren't familiar with that term, quick start, what Dave's referring to is the Colby.
Yes.
Colby, Kolbe. If you're curious about Colby, go check it out. Yeah, well, that's exciting. I mean, it's interesting to hear those numbers. I've had a podcast for some time, and one thing we started, and we didn't really know what we were doing when we started our podcast, but that was okay because back then nobody that was podcasting really knew what they were doing.
Sure.
Sort of the Wild West, and we've refined our process, but it took some time. It took some real time to figure it all out and get the bugs out and get the team oriented. But it sounds like what you're doing, it's kind of a made for you product, so that people don't have to do that. They just have to show up and
the company's called Your Podcast.Team, and that's YourPodcast.Team, not .com, but .team.
Cool.
And our service is called Podcast Done For You, with the little trademark sign, of course. And so, the idea, our tagline is having your own podcast is as easy as being a guest on ours. And so all they have to do is schedule the guest, call into a recorded call-in line, and then at the end of it, they receive an email from us, and they record a quick intro, the audio intro. They put in the guest name, they hit submit, and that's it. And we usually recommend doing just 1 a month to start, and it basically takes an hour a month. It's a few minutes to set up the call, 45 minutes to do the call, few minutes afterwards. And that's the idea. And it's interesting because when I told people that CPAs were going to be our primary market, it was funny because so many people said, oh, you don't want to, CPAs aren't a great market because they're very analytical on expenditures, I think was kind of the thing, that they may not, see the value. And of course, like you, I'm formerly a CPA. So, I've heard the frugal CPA comments before. And I said, well, let's follow Dan Sullivan's philosophy and let's test on check writers. So, the very first one of the first people I called was Briggs and Veselka, the CPA firm, who I had two of their partners on, episode 3 and episode 18, and told them about it. And they thought it sounded great and wanted to get started. So we're actually doing 2 for them. One focused on the accounting careers as a recruiting tool, and then the other where they'll be telling the story of kind of showcasing partners and clients.
Well, that's interesting as a recruiting tool, because that's one of the biggest things we hear just in talking to CPAs every day is recruiting is such a challenging thing in the CPA industry. So how does the podcast help with that challenge, do you think?
Yeah, well, and the other thing I just wanted to mention, the other reason that I was really interested in the CPA market is I have a really unique insight into the CPA profession that a lot of folks don't, because I started my career at Arthur Andersen, as a pure auditor. I've done business development for a smaller CPA firm, Briggs and Veselka, the same firm, and then we have hundreds of IC disc clients, and each one of those we coordinate with the CPA firm. So I've really got kind of an inside look in how lots of CPA firms operate, and I've been on kind of both sides. And then our firm is a specialty tax firm, so it's got certain similarities. But back to your question, as far as a recruiting tool, I'm not sure, they haven't recorded their first episode yet, and I'm not really sure. I think what they're looking to do is to try to dispel myths and or develop rapport with potential candidates. Like, I think especially like college students, you remember by the time you get to your senior year, you've got interviews with all the firms and they kind of all seem the same. And so I think what they're looking to do is try to start a relationship with those college students when they're freshmen, sophomore, juniors, so that they can distinguish themselves from the other firms. That's what my sense is that they're trying to do.
Yeah, my mind's like thinking of ideas for that. Like you could interview existing team members and kind of talk about what their experience was like coming on board, and what tax season's like, or what it's like to move up in the firm or whatever. It's all sorts of ideas that pop up.
Yeah, and alumnus, they could talk to alumnus of the firm, talking about how, serving in public accounting for 5 or 6 years was a great stepping stone to becoming a controller, right, VP of finance or CFO.
Yeah.
That's pretty exciting. And I was fortunate enough, they asked me to guest host the first episode that we recorded last week. And so I was a host on someone else's podcast. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, we had a guy on our podcast named Rich Stang, and he's talking about how culture is something they really have focused on in their firm, and how that has helped them attract and retain talent, and how that's been such a good thing for their firm, and how culture is sort of their primary focus almost, and or one of their primary focuses. And I could see how a firm like that could really benefit by explaining that culture to attract the kind of people that they want to the firm. That's pretty cool.
They're pretty excited about it, and I think for their regular podcast, and we've got some other CPA firms that are committed that hadn't launched yet. But some of the ways that they're planning to use it. So we actually have, if somebody's interested in exploring a podcast, we actually have a scorecard that can help them assess whether they're a good fit for a podcast. And that domain is YourPodcast..Team. There's 8 questions, but some of them that I think are useful to just cover right off the bat is what's the lifetime value of a client? And if the lifetime value of a client of a CPA firm or any business is more than 20 grand, then it makes it a lot easier to justify the podcast. Because for us, a podcast for 2 years costs 19 grand. So if you pick up one $20,000 client, it pays for itself. The other thing we suggest thinking about is we ask, how many clients do you have who you would spend $750 to entertain or buy a gift for? And we mention that because the podcast, for one podcast a month, we charge $750. And what I've discovered is when you have like a client as a guest on your podcast and you showcase their business and then you publicly thank them in front of the 8 billion people who might be listening, how much you appreciate their relationship and being a client. It really, I've had clients on there that after an hour in the podcast, our relationship was noticeably better than it had been in years of golfing and going out for a beer together. But it was because for 45 minutes to an hour, the focus was all on them and they got to tell their story. So that's a lot of the power. And of course, the other big power, I mean, I say having a podcast is like a superpower because more than likely nobody else in your niche has one. And so I would bet that most firms that are, not a regional or national firm, if they started a podcast in their market, they could very possibly be the only CPA firm, outside the national firms that have a podcast. All their competitors have a website. They all have LinkedIn. They all have this stuff, but almost nobody has a podcast. And when you tell people you have a podcast, it's, there's people that I couldn't have gotten a 15-minute meeting with that gladly came on the podcast for an hour. And you've probably experienced some of that yourself.
Yeah, we've been honored to have some really amazing podcast guests. Yeah, for sure. And you know what? I like doing them. I think they're kind of fun to do, and hopefully people discover that too. That
they are.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why we've started podcasting stories. So our guests on podcasting stories are people who have a podcast or people who are considering a podcast. And what we found is for people that are considering a podcast, we have it as a guest and they like the process so much, oftentimes they sign up to become a client right away. So we started that just for people who are considering a podcast. So, they could listen to other people who are thinking about it, other people who've had one. And in fact, I think you're on the schedule in a couple of weeks to be a guest on Podcasting Stories.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that. It'll be fun.
Yeah, we'll have fun and we'll get into some detail of lessons learned on having a podcast.
Yeah.
And that one we're doing weekly. We're doing a weekly release cadence, which has really been a lot of fun because I'm just really, because I love doing these. That's my favorite part of the week is doing a podcast. And so now I'm doing them much more frequently than before.
Yeah.
And the other thing we're planning to do is we're planning to take the first 12 episodes because we do transcripts for ours. So we have transcripts already. And I'm planning to turn that into a book of those. And so we'll be curious to see what the response is. So, people that are too busy to listen to the podcast or, they'd have a chance to learn some of the lessons from our guests.
Yeah, still get the content. And well, let me change gears on you just a little bit, Dave. And I've got a couple of little quick fire questions I want to ask you.
Okay.
As we wind down. So if you were if you're talking to someone who is starting a practice from scratch, a CPA practice, given what you've observed over the years, what advice would you give to somebody starting a CPA firm? Other than start a podcast.
Yeah. So I would say that my first advice would be to read several of Ron Baker's books, honestly. pricing on purpose or his original value-based pricing for accountants or something like that. And then really think about the pricing, because that's the biggest mistake I see so many firms make is they just undervalue their value.
Yeah.
And then I would really follow Ron's lessons on pricing. Have fixed fees, have unconditional satisfaction guarantees. Have a kind of an annual agreement with unlimited questions, and just really make it so you can really be their trusted advisor. Because that's from what I've seen. That's from our clients. Their two biggest complaints about their CPA firm is that they're too reactive, and every time they call them, they get a bill. So my theory is, have a fixed fee that you're not charging them. Oh, and then the CPA's biggest criticism is the clients don't call them before they do stuff. And I'm like, well, it's because you sent them a bill.
You're discouraged. You're not incentivizing them to call you.
Exactly. So that'd probably be it. Read Ron's books. Really think about pricing, and because you can always. It's hard to, it's easier to start with and that's the other lesson too, is start with a high price that's completely bundled with and this is a Ron Baker idea, have a really comprehensive service offering. Then if the client balks at that, you don't cut the fee, you just strip out features. And so if they say, hey, well, you're $10,000 a year, but the guy down the street's only $5,000. Oh, hey, no problem. Let's strip out unlimited questions. Let's strip out audit defense. Let's strip out the annual review. Those would be some thoughts.
Yeah. I guess I'm thinking about value. Yeah, his work is really good. It's excellent. So in terms of books, I think that you kind of answered that question. The one book would be Ron Baker's book. Any other things you're reading currently that's really of interest that you'd want to share book-wise?
Well, it's funny. It's nothing that I'm reading right now, but I was anticipating you asking me like what one book I might recommend. And I wasn't actually even thinking of Ron Baker at the time. And so I came up with two that are very different books. But one is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And then the other is The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. Two completely different approaches to life.
Very, very different. I haven't read Fountainhead. I've read Viktor Frankl, right? Is that his name? Yeah,
Viktor Frankl.
That's an amazing story.
You need to read The Fountainhead. It's they made a movie on it in the 50s. So if you want to just get the short version, you can just rent the movie. Okay,
maybe I'll start there. See if it's. There's the quick start. There's the quick start. This has been amazing. Real quick, what's the easiest way for people to find you online? And we'll post that in the notes when we post out the blog on this podcast.
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not super active. The best way really is just to call me on my mobile. I'll give you my mobile number, 832-654-9889, or just email me dspray@exportadvisors.com.
Awesome. And advisors is with an O as well?
Yes, ADVISORS.
Yeah, I have to tell people with Poe Group Advisors, there's an O in there, not the E. People make that mistake a lot. So, well, Dave, always a pleasure to talk to you.
For sure, Brandon.
Thank you for coming on our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, bye for now.
All right. See you.
Thanks for listening to the Accountant's Flight Plan Podcast. If you like what you heard today, please follow us so that you can get updates when new episodes are released, and share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. You can also follow Poe Group Advisors on social media. Please visit our website for more information at PoeGroupAdvisors.com.